Father Divine and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad are two of the most influential leaders of Black religious movements in American history. Father Divine was the leader of the Peace Mission movement, which hit its peak in the late 1920s before the Great Depression. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad was the leader of the Nation of Islam, which was founded in 1930 and was extremely influential during the 1950s. Both groups still exist today. How did each group emerge? What did each group believe? Let's explore these topics and more by counting down 10 similarities and differences between the Peace Mission movement and the Nation of Islam. You are watching Black Belief. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you never miss a new video. Number 1. God in person. The Peace Mission movement believed that Father Divine was God. They believed that God had chosen the body of a so-called Black man in order to illustrate the oneness of all mankind. Historians believe that Father Divine was actually a man named George Baker, who was born in Maryland shortly after the abolition of slavery. Father Divine, meanwhile, denied these claims and refused to offer any information about his past. The Nation of Islam believes that God came to Detroit, Michigan in the person of Wallace D. Farad in 1930. A woman named Clara Poole attended meetings in local homes where she heard W.D. Farad teach a complex theology which incorporated elements of Christianity and Islam. Clara invited her husband Elijah to these religious meetings, hoping they could inspire him to change his life. Elijah joined the new movement and became a loyal follower. In 1934, Master Farad allegedly left for Chicago and appointed Elijah Poole, who was renamed Elijah Muhammad, as the leader of the movement. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad is viewed within the Nation of Islam as the messenger of God. Number 2. Sky God. Father Divine criticized Christianity for encouraging people to worship a sky god, an immaterial distant deity who never directly interacted with humanity. His followers emphasized that their service, work, and devotion was directed towards a physical person who had provided food, housing, and community, while the gods of mainstream religions had not. Peace Mission movement residences were called heavens, a reflection of their belief that faith in Father Divine's spirit was the key to experiencing heaven on earth. When he died, however, the movement slowly adopted the same sky god theology that they had earlier criticized. Mother Divine presided over the movement, and tape recordings of Father Divine's speeches were played at Holy Communion banquets. Members were told that Father Divine's spirit remained among them, even though his body had passed away. The Nation of Islam also implored Black people to stop praying to Jesus as if he was still alive. Like Orthodox Islam, the NOI believed that Jesus was a prophet like Moses, that he was not God, and that he did not rise from the dead. Interestingly, the organization did not believe in an afterlife. They believed in a concept called the hereafter, which would be the period after Armageddon, a religious war between Islam, Christianity, and Buddhism. The hereafter would not be a supernatural state, however. It would be a continuation of material life on earth, with no sickness, no gambling, no cursing, and no sorrow. They claim that the so-called Negroes could experience the hereafter today if they accepted the religion of Islam as taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Number 3. Commitment to capitalism. Father Divine attracted wealthy white followers who financed the purchase of grocery stores, hotels, and other businesses. The movement required members to own the businesses cooperatively. The working class, mostly Black membership, formed the workforce and donated their labor. The profits of the businesses were donated back to the movement and controlled by Father Divine. This arrangement meant that he had no property or income attached to his name. A group of so-called consecrated members received status in the organization in exchange for their willingness to secretly donate money directly to Father Divine. The Nation of Islam embraced capitalism a little differently. Their businesses were legally owned by the organization, but this arrangement was presented to the membership as a form of collective ownership. In addition to businesses, the organization brokered deals with newspaper companies where they were given the right to publish their material in the newspaper as long as they guaranteed they could sell a large number of papers. Male members were given a quota for sales of newspapers, and meeting your quota as well as bringing in new followers was a way for members to move up the organization's ranks. Number 4, racial integration. Father Divine was a proponent of New Thought, a philosophy which taught that material reality was the result of mental states. Peace Mission Movement members believed that by renewing their mind through Father Divine's spirit, they could change the racial status quo. All communal living quarters were integrated, and seating at Holy Communion banquets was purposefully alternated by race. The Peace Mission Movement also refused to use racial terms. They often referred to light-complected people or so-called Black people. To them, racial distinctions did not exist. Father Divine eventually married Edna Richens, a white Canadian secretary who took over the movement when he died. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad did believe in racial distinctions. He taught that the so-called Negroes were descendants of the lost tribe of Shabazz, an Afro-Asiatic ethnic group. The tribe of Shabazz was scientifically advanced, with scientists who experimented with mankind. According to their theology, one scientist used a method called birth control to create white people, whom the Nation of Islam claimed were a demonic, non-human species. According to the group, white people were able to dominate Black people by hiding Black people's history and making them dependent. The Nation of Islam strictly forbade interracial relationships and opposed racial integration. They argued that Black people should give up European names and Christianity and acquire what they called knowledge of self. They proclaimed that the only solution to the so-called Negroes' problem was separation from the white man. Number 5, celibacy. Father Divine strictly forbade sexual relations within his movement and claimed that both of his marriages were completely spiritual. However, former members claimed that he frequently had sex with female followers and forced them to use douches in order to avoid pregnancy. It's alleged that Edna Richens had only been a personal secretary of Father Divine for one day when he agreed to marry her. Suspicions grew when the pair hid the marriage initially and later tried to explain that the spirit of the first Mother Divine, Panania, had entered the body of Edna Richens. In the 1960s, as Father Divine's health worsened, an up-and-coming pastor named Jim Jones offered to take over the Peace Mission movement. Fearful that they would lose their followers without a successor, Father and Mother Divine decided to adopt a child that they would raise to take over the movement. In 1962, 8-year-old Tommy Garcia arrived at the Woodmont Estate in Philadelphia, which served as the Peace Mission movement's headquarters, with his mother and sister. He was taken to a room where Father Divine abruptly reported that Tommy's parents no longer wanted him. He was told he would stay at Woodmont and be taken care of for the rest of his life.
Instead, Father Divine chose a child. Because the international peace movement was built on interracial relationships, he chose a Mexican-American child to symbolize the mixing of the races. He chose Tommy Garcia, the 8-year-old son of one of his movement's members.
Says, Tommy, it's come to my attention that no one wants you. I want you. And if you agree to live with me here at Woodmont, I will take care of you for the rest of your life.
Tommy and his sister lived an unusual and sheltered life at the Woodmont Estate. Divine's followers treated Tommy Garcia as the son of God. But when Father Divine died in 1965, his wife took control of the movement. She sent Tommy away. He made a life of his own, hardly ever sharing the story of his time with Father Divine's movement until now.
I feel that I'm the voice of my mother, my sister who's gone, and all the thousands of followers who I knew who are also disenchanted. Now they have nothing now.
The international peace movement charities that once gave food and shelter to thousands of people nearly disappeared under the leadership of Mother Divine.
I'd like for her to fulfill Father Divine's prophecy and his ideas and his foresight. He had incredible foresight. She said he was God. And all through the teachings and everything she always said, they talked about his foresight. Then when they asked her, well, who is the successful heir? Who is going to take over? She goes, the Spirit moves in mysterious ways. We have never planned that out. That makes no sense.
In the 1980s, Tommy tried to return, but followers refused to allow him on the property. He continues to fight with the remaining members of the Peace Mission movement over its assets, claiming that he is the lawful son of Father Divine. When the Honorable Elijah Muhammad began following Master Farad, He was already married and had several children. While Orthodox Islam allows men to have up to 4 wives, the Nation of Islam taught that each man should marry 1 woman. Fornication was strictly prohibited. Those found to be guilty of sex outside of marriage could face suspension or expulsion. Divorce was not encouraged, but not uncommon. Men and women were free to remarry as long as they remained chaste within those relationships. A scandal emerged when Malcolm X, a prominent former spokesperson for the Nation of Islam, defected and revealed that Elijah Muhammad had impregnated several secretaries. Malcolm X helped at least 2 women file paternity suits against Muhammad. The FBI hoped to use this information and the departure of Malcolm X to destroy the Nation of Islam. Clara Muhammad was hurt and often traveled abroad to avoid seeing the other women and their children. Nevertheless, she remained loyal to the movement until she died. Malcolm X left and established his own organization, the Organization of Afro-American Unity, but was assassinated in 1965. The Nation of Islam survived the crisis and was later revived under the leadership of Louis Farrakhan, a former mentee of Malcolm X. Honorable Louis Farrakhan explained later that Elijah Muhammad concealed his additional relationships out of fear that members would return to a life of total fornication, forsaking marriage entirely. Today, the Nation of Islam members openly recognize the other wives of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. The wives and their children remain active in the movement. Number 6, War and Peace. The Peace Mission movement always emphasized American patriotism. Father Divine taught that America would be the birthplace of the kingdom of God on earth. His support for capitalism was an extension of his embrace of pro-American values. Still, members were free to follow their own consciences when deciding whether to serve in the military or to claim conscientious objector status. By the time the United States entered World War II, the country was rising out of its economic depression. The decreasing number of people in need, as well as legal battles with former members, prompted Father Divine to legally incorporate the movement. With the rise of more Black nationalist and militant groups, Father Divine's marriage to a white woman further decreased his movement's appeal. In 1942, Honorable Elijah Muhammad and his sons were imprisoned for evading the draft and preaching sedition. The Nation of Islam viewed the attack by Japan at Pearl Harbor as a positive sign that Armageddon and the fall of the white-dominated world was near. By the time the men were released, membership in the Nation of Islam had dwindled, but the Muhammad family had built credibility due to their willingness to challenge the U.S. government. Elijah Muhammad, his wife Clara, and later Malcolm X quickly rebuilt the organization. Decades later, in 1967, famous member Muhammad Ali, formerly known as Cassius Clay, brought the Nation of Islam's stance on war to the forefront once again. Ali refused to fight in the Vietnam War, stating that he was not allowed to fight in wars unless ordered to by Allah, W.D. Farad, or the messenger Elijah Muhammad. Ali's conviction for draft evasion was appealed all the way up to the Supreme Court. In Clay versus the United States, the Supreme Court judges used a technicality to overturn Muhammad Ali's conviction without jeopardizing the U.S. draft system entirely. In 2005, Muhammad Ali was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by George W. Bush. Number 7, International Connections. The Peace Mission movement had international extensions in Europe, Australia, Canada, and the West Indies. Many foreign branches had only white members. Despite this racial homogeneity, they reaffirmed their commitment to Father Divine's racial teachings. However, as the movement declined in the 1950s, international heavens closed. The number of new members decreased, and the focus turned to retaining old members, selling off assets, and legally designating properties as historical landmarks. The decline of the Peace Mission movement signaled the rise of the Nation of Islam. The international response to the Nation of Islam has been mixed. The first pillar of Orthodox Islam, the Shahada, requires a Muslim to affirm that there is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. Another foundational principle of Islam requires Muslims to affirm that Muhammad ibn Abdullah is the seal of the prophets. This means that no other prophets will come after him. The Nation of Islam's traditional interpretation of the Shahada casts Master W.D. Farad as Allah and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad as his messenger. This belief alone has garnered sharp criticism from the Islamic world. Still, Elijah Muhammad did form some global ties. He made his pilgrimage to Mecca, another one of the 5 pillars of Islam, in 1959, 1967, and 1971, where he spoke with Muslim scholars. This led to some outward Islamization while keeping the distinct African American focus internally. For example, the Nation of Islam often taught from the Bible instead of from the Quran. They had 2 meeting rooms in their temples, one which looked more like a mosque and another that looked more like a church with pews and a pulpit. They celebrated Ramadan in the month of December, which correlated with the Christmas season. These practices were tailored for their intended audience, Black Americans who were deeply enmeshed in Protestant religious traditions. Over the years, Farrakhan has still sought relations with Muslim leaders around the world and slowly moved the Nation of Islam's teachings towards Sunni Islam. However, he continues to emphasize the importance of retaining the organization's appeal to Black Americans and introducing Islamic concepts gradually. He believes that Master W.D. Farad and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad never intended for Black Americans to embrace Arabian customs completely, lest they adopt practices that were equally as harmful as those they left behind in Christianity. Number 8. Soul food. Historians believe that the man who became known as Father Divine was born George Baker to Nancy and George Baker Sr. The Bakers were poor like most African Americans in their community and survived on cornmeal, pork fat, and hominy, the only foods they could afford. This diet, in addition to the stress, led to Nancy gaining a significant amount of weight. In 1897, when she died, she was reportedly 5 feet tall and weighed 480 pounds. This early experience with his mother's health led Father Divine to associate rich, delicious foods with love and abundance. Far from encouraging his followers to restrict their diet, he made traditional African American food, also known as soul food, a centerpiece of his famous Holy Communion banquets. Twice a week, he would weigh his followers and admonish those who had lost weight. In his view, maintaining a heavier weight was a reflection of his ability to provide for his followers' physical needs. Elijah Muhammad wrote a 2-part series of books entitled How to Eat to Live. In his writings, he tells his followers to abstain from eating black-eyed peas, collard greens, and cornbread. Members of the Nation of Islam were encouraged to eat 1 meal a day and to fast for 2 to 3 days regularly. For them, soul food was a symbol of Black Americans' disconnect from their true identity, as well as the root of their myriad of health problems. The organization hosted Muslim girls training and general civilization classes, where women were trained on how and what to cook, how to treat their husbands, how to rear their children, and how to take care of their households. In the early days, women were strictly required to maintain a weight of 120 pounds. Within the Fruit of Islam, the Nation of Islam's paramilitary internal enforcement group, men were required to maintain a weight of 150 pounds. These strict requirements have eased over the years, but the emphasis on eating according to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's dietary guidelines remains. Number 9. Political action. Father Divine was a critic of President Franklin D. Roosevelt. He opposed the New Deal programs because he believed they encouraged lifelong government dependency, and he also noted how the New Deal was not offered equally to Black and white citizens. He also opposed Roosevelt's ending of prohibition. Father Divine's followers in Los Angeles decided to craft a political platform which they felt reflected peace mission values. They organized the 1936 International Divine Righteous Government Convention, which hosted 5,000 delegates from peace missions around the world. State representatives, candidates, and community leaders also attended. Using quotes from Father Divine in the document, they advocated for strict unionization guidelines, an end to capital punishment, the repeal of laws requiring insurance, and the eradication of racism, including the elimination of racial terms. As the election approached, national politicians refused to endorse the platform. As a result, Father Divine ordered his followers nationwide to stay home and not vote on Election Day. When the results were announced, President Roosevelt won election again, and there was no evidence of a sharp decrease in Black turnout in comparison to past elections. For the 1940 election, Father Divine would try again to shift the political landscape. The focus for that year's International Righteous Government Convention was opposition to lynching. The organization launched a letter-writing campaign to urge passage of an anti-lynching bill. They successfully gathered 250,000 signatures, but the petition received no interest from Congress. A foreign policy proposal was included, which sought to bring North, South, and Central America under the control of the United States. This provision likely deterred politicians who would have otherwise supported the petition. The Nation of Islam did not advocate voting and did not support the nonviolent civil rights movement. Their theology taught that white people were irreparably evil and would never grant equal rights to Black people. They correctly pointed out that the Constitution of the United States was supposed to already include rights for Black Americans, and yet these stipulations had been unenforced and ignored. They also believed that the strategy of nonviolence was asking the Black community to accept violence from white people. While the Honorable Elijah Muhammad required his members to respect all constituted authority, whether Black or white, he also taught that if a member was attacked first, they should fight back even to the point of death. In 1962, after long-standing tensions, members of the Nation of Islam had a violent clash with police in South Central Los Angeles. 2 LAPD police officers beat 2 members unprovoked as they were exiting the mosque, and other members came to their defense. In the scuffle, 1 police officer was accidentally shot by his partner. By this time, 70 backup officers arrived on the scene. The officers beat random members and shot at least 2 members. 1 was paralyzed and the other was killed. In the aftermath, several members of the Nation of Islam were arrested, but no police officer was charged with a crime. Enraged at the incident, Malcolm X rallied more militant members and sought the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's permission to carry out revenge against the police department. Malcolm X was shocked when his leader refused his request. Malcolm X asked if the nation could alternatively work with local civil rights organizations and leaders to respond to the incident. This proposal was also denied. This incident, among others, caused Malcolm X to question the effectiveness of the Nation of Islam's teachings and to eventually leave the organization. Number 10, succession. The 1953 marriage between Father Divine and Edna Richens was the most visible symbol of the Peace Mission movement's decline. Father Divine scrambled to retool his theology in order to explain why he had married a younger white wife when his movement taught strict celibacy. When he died in 1965, Mother Divine, the movement's new leader, had to update the theology once again. She taught that Father Divine's spirit remained with his followers and that his death was a supreme sacrifice made for the salvation of humanity. She prophesied that Father Divine would rise from the dead, but that his followers should continue to act as if he were present in the meantime. Mother Divine's control of the movement depended on the idea that she was the first Mother Divine, only in a different body, and that Father Divine was still spiritually present and therefore able to punish disloyal members. These teachings were challenged when a potential usurper arrived. In 1971, Pastor Jim Jones and several hundred of his followers from the People's Temple arrived at the Woodmont estate. During this visit, Jim Jones allegedly offered once again to take control of the Peace Mission movement, but Mother Divine refused. Later in the evening, during a Holy Communion banquet, some of Jim Jones's followers stood up to testify about how Jones had changed their lives. Jim Jones stood up after them and declared that Father Divine's spirit had entered his body. The claim was a cynical attempt to apply the Peace Mission's beliefs in reincarnation to himself. Mother Divine immediately jumped into action. She declared that Jim Jones was not a friend at all and was really the other fellow, a term the Peace Mission used to describe the devil. She ordered him and his followers to leave and forbade them from entering any of their properties. She also changed the theology once again to ensure that no one else could claim to have received either her or Father Divine's spirit into their body. The last Peace Mission Promised Land colony in Ulster County, New York, was sold in 1985. By 1986, the Peace Mission's New Day publication had only 800 subscribers. The last 2 Philadelphia hotels, the Divine Lorraine and the Divine Tracy, were closed in 1999 and 2006. A handful of older followers supported maintenance of the Woodmont estate. They continued to hold Holy Communion banquets during which a seat was always reserved for Father Divine. In March of 2017, Mother Divine died at the age of 92. On February 25, 1975, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad died at 77 years old. Minister Louis Farrakhan seemed like the logical choice for a successor, but in a move which shocked observers, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's son, Wallace Dean Muhammad, assumed leadership. Wallace had learned Arabic from native speakers at the NOI schools. When he began studying the Quran, he realized there were glaring contradictions between its teachings and those of his father. Over the years, Wallace Muhammad was excommunicated many times for refusing to acknowledge Master Farad as God and his father as God's prophet. Followers were surprised that someone who had challenged the NOI's teachings would be selected for leadership. However, since he was the seventh child born to Honorable Elijah Muhammad and his first wife, Clara Muhammad, skeptics felt they couldn't openly object. Challenging the royal family of the Nation of Islam was dangerous for any member. Almost immediately, Wallace began making changes. He changed the name of the Nation of Islam, eventually settling on the American Society of Muslims. He announced that the organization would no longer teach that Master Farad was divine or that his father was a prophet. He would eventually change his own first name to Warth instead of Wallace. He changed all temples to traditional mosques. He ordered that leaders begin providing instruction from the Quran exclusively instead of from the Bible, which was a frequent practice. He introduced the 5 pillars of Islam, reversed all teachings against whites and Jews, and changed his own title to Imam. He also disbanded the paramilitary force called the Fruit of Islam. Imam Warth Muhammad was open about his goals. He wanted to move the Nation of Islam to Orthodox Sunni Islam and forge connections with Muslims around the world. He was applauded by outsiders for his efforts. Internally, however, some members were not pleased. Minister Louis Farrakhan carefully broke away from Imam Warth's organization to restart the Nation of Islam with its former teachings. He brought along several of Elijah Muhammad's wives, their children, and other high-profile members. These key individuals helped to craft a theological interpretation, which legitimized his leadership. The period under the leadership of Imam Warth was referred to as the Fall. The reestablishment of the Nation of Islam under Honorable Louis Farrakhan was referred to as the Resurrection. Surprisingly, no one was harmed or killed from either man's family. Some believe this was because several of Minister Farrakhan's and Imam Warth's children had intermarried with each other before the schism. Months before Honorable Minister Farrakhan departed the NOI, however, another man named Silas Muhammad, along with a few supporters, went to Atlanta to organize the Lost Found Nation of Islam, or LFNOI. Honorable Silas Muhammad feared that he would be killed for standing against the teachings of Imam Warth. Today, he is revered by his followers for being so committed to the teachings of Master W.D. Farad and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad that he was willing to risk his life to stand up for them. The LFNOI and the NOI have oscillated between violent confrontation and tenuous truce over the decades. In the early 90s, there were discussions of a possible unification. In the late 90s, the groups battled over newspaper territories, and one of the LFNOI Atlanta mosques was firebombed. The LFNOI accused members of the NOI of the attack. The NOI denied the allegations. The LFNOI has continued to implore the NOI to recognize Silas Muhammad as a prophet, which has been a continuing source of tension. Only time can tell whether these organizations will one day permanently join forces. Father Divine attracted followers with the allure of an integrated heaven on earth where racial distinctions did not exist. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad presented a different vision of heaven, one where Black people alone reign supreme. The Peace Mission movement declined because a large part of its appeal was the prospect of living with God in the body of a Black man on earth, and the perception that Father Divine was above reproach. Living and donating to Mother Divine as Edna Richens was far less appealing. With the Nation of Islam, the prospect of a separate nation was attractive but unrealistic. Many Black people wanted to participate in the greater society and supported the effort to end codified Jim Crow, even while they admitted that integration would not resolve all of Black America's problems. The publication of the autobiography of Malcolm X caused many to sympathize with Malcolm X's ideological journey and increased the distance between the larger Black community and the Nation of Islam. Honorable Louis Farrakhan has sought to heal these divisions over the years. In the case of both organizations, Black working class people were asked to contribute their devotion, labor, and money to an alternative vision of the world.